Hello guys, welcome. This is Deepika from mytutorialrack.com and we are going to cover another interview question in this tutorial. And the question is difference between static methods, static variables and static classes in Java. So we are going to first talk about static methods and static variables. Whenever you use the word static, that represents that it belongs to the class, not to the individual objects. For example, when you create a particular class, right? When you define a class, you define a couple of instance variables like num1, num2, and then you have a method, let's say display, and you define that method, correct? So when you create, let's say the name of the class is demo. When you create an object of the class, demo d1 is equals to new of demo, what happens is d1 is going to get its own copy of num1 and num2. Okay, and similarly, if you create another object called d2, d2 will have its own copy of num1 and num2. So if you have set num1 to 10 here, it's not going to set up num1 to 10 in d2. You can set up whatever you want in d2 because it's its own copy. But whereas when you define a static variable, that static variable is going to be shared with all the objects of that particular class because that static variable are bound to the class and they are invoked using the class name rather than the object. Okay, so static methods and static variables are those methods and variables that belong to the class of the Java program, not to the object of the class. So this is a very important point. It does not belong to the object, it belongs to the class. So even if any object tried to change the value, that value would be shared across all the different objects. Whereas instance variables doesn't get affected if you update one object's instance variable because each of the object has its own copy of those instance variables. And the way to call the static variable or a static method is through the class name. You don't create an object of that class to call a static method or a static variable. You can directly call it with the class name and then the dot operator and then whatever the variable you want to call or whatever the method you want to call. That is how you invoke a static variable. And these can directly be called with the help of class name. So if you have used Java extensively, you probably have used these max function or min functions or square root functions or power functions, and all we did was using the class name. Rather than creating the object of this math class, you said math.max or math.minimum. That tells you that this is a static method because you are not creating the object of the class, you are directly calling it with the class name. So all of these are static method. So that is the main difference. So in order to call a static variable or a static method, you do not need to instantiate or create an object of the class. You can directly invoke them by using the class name and dot notation. Okay, and whatever method or whatever variable you want to invoke. So that is what the static method is. Now let's go ahead and take a look at the example that I've created here. So this is my Eclipse here, and in this example, the name of the class is helper class, and I have defined two variables. Now these are the instance variables, correct? And this is your instance variable because you're not using any keyword like static in next to them, and this is your class variables. They belong to the class and these are also called as the static variable. Okay, so I have defined a method called static, and in the first line of the method it's a print statement which is going to say I am a static method, and then num3 is equals to num3 plus 10. So what is the value of num3 here? What value have you given to num3? I have given a value of num3 of 10. Okay, let's say. Okay, or we can in order to instantiate, you can directly call this class name and then num3 to set up the value. So let's go back to this class. So num3 is equals to num3 plus 10, and then the value of num3 you are printing. There is another non-static method, because what is the difference between static and non-static? One will have the keyword static and non-static will not have any keyword called static. Okay, and this is a display method. It takes in two parameters. Num1 is equals to whatever you're passing plus of 1, and whatever you're passing in num2 you are adding it and putting it in num2, and then the last statement is area of the rectangle. So let's go ahead and see what we are doing here. So first thing is I am declaring or initializing the num3, which is a static variable. I'm setting the value of num3. So this is how I'm doing it. So we have, it's a class, okay, let's say, and this num3 belongs to the class, and num3 is equals to 10, correct? So num3 is equals to 10. Okay, so we have initialized the value of num3 to 10. The next statement is helper static dot of area. So we are invoking the area method, and area method is a static method. The reason is I don't have to create the object of the class to call this area method. I'm directly calling it based on the class name. So area, what is the area method says? Area methods prints the value. First thing that will be printed on the screen would be this one. I am a static method. Okay, that's what will going to get printed on the screen. And then the next statement says num3 is equals to num3 plus 10. So this becomes plus 10. So what is the new value of num3? Num3 is equals to 20 now. Okay. Then system.out.println, now it will print the value of num3, and what will get printed here? Num3 is equals to 20 will get printed. Okay, now let's go back to our static, that is the area method is done. Now we are creating an instance, okay, and the name of the instance is HP. So now we are creating an instance here. So let's say this is your instance that you are creating, and this is referenced by HP. Now HP will have its value of num1 and num2, right? So what is num1? You are putting display method is called n9 and 10. Okay, but what it becomes actually, because now what will happen is display method is going to get called, and in display method num1 is equals to n1 plus 1. So what are we passing in n1? n1 is 9. So 9 plus 1 becomes what? 10. Right, so this becomes 10, and 8 plus 1 becomes 9. Okay, this is going to be the value. So now this display method is going to call, and what it is going to print? It is going to print the area. And what is the area here? Area is num1 into num2, which is area is going to be 90. Okay, so the next statement is going to be area is equals to 90. So the whole statement, area of the rectangle equals to 90. I'm just putting a small snapshot of it. Then going back again, you are calling the area method again. Now what does the area method does? Area method is working on I am a static method. Again, this line will get printed. I am a static method. This is again the line would be printed. I am a static method, because you're calling the area. And then num3 plus 10. What is the value of num3? 20. 20 plus 10 becomes 30. So now what is the value of num3? Value of num3 is going to be 30. It acted upon the previous value. Okay, because it's common across everybody. It's a class variable rather than an instance variable. So this becomes 30. Now again, what you are doing is you are creating another object here of this class. It has its own copy. So another object gets created, and let's say this is another object, and this has num1 and num2, and this is called as HP2. Okay, I'm sorry about this whole writing on the board, but I think this makes it much more easier to understand. And then h2 dot of display 10 comma 5. So num1 here becomes 11, because we have that num1 n1 plus 1, right, equals to num1, and then equals to 5 plus 1 becomes 6, and then we're calling the area. So it is area is going to be 66. This should be the output of the program, and let's see if our answer matches. Run as Java application, and ta-da, you have I'm a static method, num3 is 20, area of the rectangle is 90, I'm a static method again, value of num3 is 30, and then 66. So basically, when you define a static variable, it belongs to the class, and all the objects are going to share that one copy. Multiple copies of the variable is not present. There is only a single copy, and all the objects are going to see the same copy, whereas the instance variables are copied to each of the objects. Every object of the class is going to have its own copy of those instance variables, and if you change the instance variables on one object, the other object is not going to get affected. But if you have changed a static variable, then that is only one copy. So you're acting upon the same previous value. That is what the static variable is. And static method, you do not need to create the object to call a static method. For example, you have used functions like power or functions like square root or some functions like min, max. You have used those static methods, and the way you have called them is through math is the name of the class, dot, and then the static method's name. Whereas in non-static method, you first need to create an object of the class in order to invoke that particular method. Now, what about a static class? Now, let's look at this last. A class in the Java program cannot be static except if it is an inner class. Only an inner class can be static. And just like any other things that we have discussed, the static inner class works the same. So the main class cannot be static, and inner class can be static. Okay. So this is the difference between the static variable and static method. I hope the explanation that I've given has made crystal clear, and I'm going to see you in the next video. Stay tuned to that, and thank you very much and have a wonderful rest of the day.